Hey teachers, if you have been feeling a little bit stressed about teaching how context shapes language, then you're probably not alone. Now, we're going to be talking about this in relation to New Zealand's 1.1 for Year 11, context shapes language. But I know that in other countries you also teach this type of thing, so this might be helpful for you as well. Now, who am I? I am no authority on this. I am simply a teacher and a creator of resources who likes to sit down and work it out, and I've been looking into this and playing around with the standard since its first inception. So here is my 2 cents worth. Before I go on, I have got a blog on this with a lot more detail in it, so I'll link that below, and I'll try and sort of skim over the general gist of things in this. So let's talk about context first. To begin with, you need to have a context in mind, something that you know will resonate with your students, that they will that will be accessible to them. For example, your social issue podcasts, which are quite popular at the moment, simply because a lot of the exemplars have been in of that ilk. Protest speeches I absolutely adore. Motivational speeches I also adore. You've also got things like war poetry, don't forget that. Advertorials, sports commentary, social media, language, and things like that. So next, gather, I say half a dozen texts from that context. Now, YouTube is fantastic because TED Talks are on there. They are cracking good. And also because you can get the transcript. Just push a little button, get the transcript from there. However, you are going to have to copy and paste it into a document and bring in the margins so they can annotate later. We'll talk about that later too. And also because they do need editing a bit, and formatting is really important. So don't just go blah on the page and give that to your students. Format it, edit it. So I would put, say, 2 texts aside and use those as teaching tools, and then take 4 texts and set them aside so that students can later on use them for assessment. So they will choose just one of those, of course, but they are sacrosanct. You don't go near them when you're teaching because that'll be cheating. The other thing you need is a set of language features, cracking good set of language features, not in alphabetical order, but categorized. So have all of your figurative language together, your sound devices together, your sentence structures together, and so on. It helps students understand the use of those language features much better. Now, this standard is all about the context. This assessment is all about the context. Students need a fantastic understanding of that context in order to discuss the language features that are used, why they are used, why they are typical. So when you're talking about context with students, you're talking about the background first, or the situation. So the political, historical, social situation. Now, those are quite difficult terms for a Year 11 to understand. So I would just suggest that they think about what's happened in the past, what's happening now, what might happen in the future, so that they understand this. For example, if students are studying Pania Newton's TED Talk about ihumato, they need to understand the colonisation of New Zealand, conflict and confiscation of land. They need to understand who Pania Newton is and what she was wanting, and her involvement in ihumato and all of that kind of thing. So then they are better equipped to cope with that text. The second part of context is about the speaker, let's go for the audience first. So to whom is the speaker or the writer talking, obviously, but also what groups do they represent? Group or groups do they represent? Now, bearing in mind the background that we've learned about, the situation, what do we think that this audience has come to this speech with? So I'm talking about, what are their feelings? So their emotions. What are their values? What are their beliefs? What are their wants and hopes and needs? What are their experiences here? So, and the other thing is, what knowledge are they coming with? Perhaps they're actually quite ignorant about a situation, so they need, they're about to learn something, they're about to be enlightened. So these are all things that students need to consider about the audience. The third thing is the speaker. So from what point of view is the speaker coming? So their experience, their cultural or their political values. Now, because these things determine similar things to what we talk about with the audience, they determine their feelings, what they're coming to the speech feeling. So their emotions, what they value, what they believe, what their wants, hopes, needs are, and therefore what their purpose is with this text, what they are trying to get the audience to feel, believe, understand, or do. So those are the three things: the background or situation, whatever you want to call it, the audience, and the speaker. Okay, so this next thing is a little tip that's going to help students not just with this assessment, but also with their writing, their own writing, and also with comprehension. So for reading unfamiliar text and thinking about the purpose, the idea, and how the writer gets those things across using language features. Okay, so what I suggest you do, or what I like to do, is I like to use a metaphor or metaphors to refer to the speakers or writers. So instead of calling them the speaker, the writer, which is like, oh, boring, I like to call them puppeteers. So a puppeteer controls the audience with powerful strings, i.e. language features, right? To make them feel, believe, or do something. Another one that I often use is the superhero. A superhero controls their audience with superpowers, language features, to make them feel, do, believe, whatever. You could go down the track of Ngā Atua, the Māori gods. So Tāwhiri Mātia, imagine him spitting out wind and rain and hail and all of that, and he is controlling people, blowing them away with wind and rain and hail, i.e. language features. So controlling them with that. Who have we got here? Te Marama, the moon. Imagine the moon having power over the tides. So same thing, the moon with its secret vibes, pushing and pulling the audience. Tumatauenga, the god of war, hunting, fishing, obviously has an arsenal of weaponry to control people. So again, that arsenal is your language features. So little metaphors like that are brilliant for helping students understand that a writer or speaker is deliberately manipulating that audience. And these are the tools that they're using to do that. Okay, so students need to understand that there are some language features that are typical of specific or certain contexts. For example, you might have your kai kōrero's speech welcoming the manuhiri at a 4:30. So what language features are typical of that? So there might be reference to ancestors, to the gods. There might be a whakatauki in there that represents the kaupapa of the day. They will probably thank the house, bless the house, and so on. So those language features are typical, and a lot of metaphors, they use a lot of metaphors, are typical of that context. Advertorials, you've got imperatives, repetition, promises, statistics, action verbs. Those language features are typical. Now, a fun way to help students understand this is to get them to do something that they will automatically know how to do intuitively. So get them to write, say, a motivational speech, persuading students to volunteer for toilet cleaning duties at school. And just tell them just one short paragraph. Then get those together and have a look at the language features that they have probably unknowingly used. Make a list on the board, put a few examples behind them, and then say, hey, look at us. We've actually used language features that are typical of motivational speeches. So that's what we mean by language features that are typical of a context. Now, when students do that, they actually have a head start when they go to analyze their own text later on. So they might choose, another language, another text about that's a motivational text because you've been studying motivational text in class. So they've got their own text they're doing for the assessment, and they are going into this already knowing some of the language features that are probably going to be in there and being familiar with what those language features are and look like, and probably as effects as well, because you want to have a look at that and why are they used in this context. So do that first and use that little fun activity, help them understand this concept. Could I have said that in any more difficult way? Okay, next thing is annotation. Now, I have harped on about annotation plenty of times before. We've got to teach students how to annotate. We've got to annotate. We've got to teach them how to annotate, because annotation means they're physically playing with that text, but they also have that visual to refer to later. They get to know the text in detail. So make sure, this is why they have to have a transcript, right? And it's important to have wide margins around it because they need to be able to make notes. So get students to simply highlight, circle, underline, whatever, the examples of the things that stand out for them as that might have a great impact on the audience. Now, if they can label those with, the language feature name, like metaphor, imperative, rhetorical question, then that's fantastic. But if they can if they can then also make a quick note about what they think the effect is, that's fantastic. Extended annotation, shall we say. So try and get them to do that, and encourage them to think about, when they're discussing the effect, to encourage them to think about, so the effect, not just the effect on the audience, but also what this might suggest about the speaker, because we learn things about the speaker in the way they say it, the words they used, right? So those are a couple of little things there. Of course, they are going to have their list of language features available, their categorized list of language features available. I strongly recommend that is printed out as well, because it is so much easier for students if it is sitting there, that they can flick through it and it's sitting beside them while they are annotating. So 2 bits of paper here, the language features and the text that they're annotating. Get off the screen. Now we're into it. We've done a lot of background work. The students have a lot of understanding about context and language features typical of that context. And now they are doing it with their actual text, except we'll do a practice first. So what do they need to do to achieve this assessment? First thing, this is how I've broken it down. The first thing they've got to do is describe the characteristics of that language feature. In other words, in general, not necessarily in this text that they're looking at, in general, what do similes do to people? So a simile will help us compare things. They give us a visual, So that's describing the characteristics of a rhetorical question. They ask a question of the audience. The speaker doesn't expect an answer. However, it really makes the audience think about what their answer might be and helps them engage in what the speaker is saying. So that's the general characteristics of a rhetorical question. So the next step is to describe how this language feature, like that rhetorical question, is typical of this context. Now, remember that background work that you did about language features that are typical is going to help the students here. So why the example I've used in my blog is similes are typically used in cooking demonstrations because the chef wants their audience to have something to compare what their mixture looks like with. So this helps budding cooks see if their mixture is ready or not. So because they have a visual there, so it's got to be whipped like a whipped thing. I don't know. I'm just thinking about my sourdough. It has to look whipped to be ready. So that's the typical language feature. Now, a clever student might be able to talk about why that language feature is atypical in a context like this. I wouldn't push that until it comes up, but you know, they might do it themselves anyway. So the next thing is that students have to, and they would have already done this, find the example. So give the quotation of the example. Remember to get them to use the 66 and the 99 quotation marks, get them quoting correctly, and if you really want to push them, get them to blend those quotations into their own sentence, so letting in and out of the quotation rather than quote dumping, but that's by the by. Now, the next stage is to describe the effect of that example. Now, that's where you look at the whole puppeteer and the puppets thing, the tawhiri mātia and the people getting blown away thing. So what's the effect on the audience, and what if they think of something, if it works, what might this suggest about the speaker as well, because we can get little hints about the speaker. So that would actually be moving into merit category if you sort of got them to push to that extent. Do remember to teach the students that they are talking about the specific example here, not thus a simile, because they tend to see that as a simile or a metaphor or a rhetorical question. You want them to be talking about that specific example in their specific text. So rather than saying describe the effect of the language feature, get them to describe the effect of the example. And that's a little important tip for unfamiliar texts as well, because students, again, they need to be looking at that specific example. What does it make you see, hear, feel, whatever? Okay, so that's the next and final step for achieved. Okay, so if you have already given your students this massive background understanding of the context, the real nitty-gritties about the situation, the speaker, the audience, and what everyone's coming to this place with, and you've really unpacked how to talk about the effect of language features, so on the audience, their feelings, their beliefs, their understanding, their what they've been made to do even, and maybe what it suggests about the speaker, then they're probably already moving into merit category in that they are explaining the link between the language feature and the context quite well already. So that's cool. Get into that, push that a little bit more. So explain is the verb here. So explaining why this example is particularly effective in this situation, with this audience, for this speaker. So it's just that little bit of extra oomph. Now, the second part of merit, there was a bit of contention about this last year. So in my experience, and Joe's experience with pilot school, students always had to talk about how their language feature worked well with another language feature to better illustrate the idea, the purpose, and so on. That was fine. And then there was some argument that students did not need to do this from NCEA, but we were told that that's what they had to do. So, you know how it is. Now, I noticed that this year it's specifically asked students to do that. So we'll carry on running with that. I think they should do it anyway. It's just good practice. It's good reading. So, students need to explain how one language feature works well with another language feature to boost that impact, to better illustrate that idea, to better serve the speaker's purpose. Now, you can resort to your metaphors again. You know, ice cream is really great, gives us a real buzz. Chocolate's really great, we get a real buzz from that. But if you put them together, boof, it's just a taste bud sensation. There's more impact. So same thing with language features. So that might be a nice little way to explain it. So that's how we are getting into that merit territory. In the final bit, let's discuss excellence and what that might look like. Now, before I go on, I can't remember if I read or I heard somewhere that NCEA said that excellence should be hard to get. So if you are thinking, oh, this is too difficult, yeah, it is difficult. And I actually think it should be difficult as well. But let's see how we can scaffold students into moving into that excellence category, that upper echelon. All right, so for excellence, the verb is to examine. Students need to examine. As I said, they really need to get into this. So they are examining. And by that, we mean, or they mean, drawing conclusions. So the first step there would be for me to explain what drawing conclusions is to my students. And obviously, I'm going to use a metaphor or a funny example. So Tim is standing beside the pool, and his clothes are soaking wet. So the conclusion I come to is that Tim jumped in the pool with his clothes on. What an egg. Now, if I take this further, so with my critical thinking, I could say, oh, did he fall, like slip? Did he jump in deliberately, or did some bullies come along and push him in? So that's like where my brain is starting to take me, and where students' brains who are looking at that excellence category, who are really trying to delve into this deeply, will start going down that track where they're really thinking about things and questioning as well. So that's a bit of evaluation, but I think if you try not to limit them just by drawing conclusions, get them thinking critically about things. So now I scaffold students into what this can look like. So for example, and just reading from the blog here, so how the perspective of, for example, what conclusions can you draw about how the perspective of the speaker affected their decision to use this feature, or how this language feature might have more of an effect on some audiences or audience members than others. What about the ongoing impact of this language feature? For example, what if the speaker risked belittling or offending the audience with this inappropriate reference? Or how might this language feature affect the relationship between the speaker and the audience? So little things like that, giving students ideas about what they could think about really helps. And once they get started, they actually start thinking of their own ideas. Now, the other thing that I would add to that to help them into excellence, well, I teach it to everyone really, because I think it will lift their writing and maybe push them up a little bit more, is using hedging words. So we reserve hedging generally for evaluation. So, and it's about hedging your bets when you're making a statement, right? So give them a few of these starters. So introduce them to things like, this suggests, this illustrates, it's reasonable to believe that, this is possibly, this is likely, perhaps, ideally. So those hedging words and phrases really help push their critical thinking and give them a way to express their thoughts. So that's that. Now, as I said in the beginning, I am not an authority here. I don't work for NCEA or NCEA or anyone. I am just a teacher who has just been playing around with the standard and working it out. It might give you a little bit of extra ammo, an extra tool in your toolbox for your own unpacking of this standard. So hopefully that helps, and yeah, enjoy. It's actually a fantastic and fun standard once you get to know it.